imagine standing at the edge of the only city you've ever known. You're staring into the dead of night, leaving behind your home, your history, your entire earthly identity.
Yeah, it's everything.
Right. And you're not leaving for an adventure. You are literally being hunted. Today we're doing a deep dive into the source texts behind the Hijra.
The great migration from Mecca to Medina.
Exactly. We are immersing ourselves in the lecture series, exploring the life of Prophet Muhammad, the legacy of the greatest man who ever lived. And, I mean, the stakes here are just absolute.
They really are. It's the ultimate exile. You know, we're looking at this terrifying journey across an unforgiving desert. And these men are facing severe persecution, not just to survive, but to establish a whole new community.
A community based entirely on a new religious paradigm.
Right. The entire future of the faith, the weight of this message, rooted in divine truth, it all hangs on whether they can survive this one migration.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the catalyst for this departure is, honestly, it's as tense as any political thriller. It starts with an assassination plot by Abu Jahl.
Right, the Quraysh see the message spreading, and Abu Jahl proposes this plan that is essentially a masterclass in exploiting tribal loopholes.
Yeah, he decides to gather one strong, armed man from every single clan in Mecca so they can all strike simultaneously.
It was brutal, but I mean, it was a brilliant piece of legal maneuvering within their society. Because you have to remember how tribal law operated back then. Blood revenge was the ultimate deterrent.
So if one man commits a murder, his whole family is the target.
Exactly. What Abu Jahl engineered was a way to distribute that liability. If every clan's sword strikes at the exact same moment, the blood guilt is dispersed across the entire city.
Creating a perfect legal paradox.
Okay.
The victim's family couldn't possibly declare war on every single clan in Mecca. They'd be completely outnumbered.
They would have no choice but to stand down and accept financial compensation, the blood money. It was literally designed to be an unsolvable murder.
Wow. And that forces this immediate, highly secretive departure. The texts tell us the Prophet goes to Abu Bakr at noon, specifically choosing a time when the blistering heat forces everyone indoors, right?
Yeah, ensuring the streets are totally empty.
And he tells Abu Bakr that the migration has been ordained and asks him to be his companion. Now imagine that. You are being asked to walk directly into a citywide assassination plot.
A distributed death sentence, basically.
Exactly. Yet the accounts emphasize that Abu Bakr's reaction isn't terror at all. He actually weeps out of profound joy.
What's fascinating here is what that response reveals about the psychology of devotion described in these sources. Abu Bakr understood the physical reality.
He knew the Quraysh were actively mobilizing.
Right. But he is overcome with emotion just for the honor of standing by his companion's side. It represents this absolute conviction. The fear of physical destruction is entirely eclipsed by the spiritual honor of the journey.
It's a level of loyalty that is just hard to comprehend today. Volunteering to absorb that kind of risk purely out of love. And, you know, it's important to note the emotional toll this took on the Prophet as well.
Oh, absolutely.
As they leave, the texts record him looking back at Mecca, expressing this intense agony. He says something like, "By Allah, you are the most beloved land to Allah and the most beloved land to me. If I had not been driven out of you, I would never have left."
The narrative makes it so clear this wasn't someone eagerly abandoning his roots. The emotional gravity is profound. He's being torn away from his childhood land.
His family history, his people.
Right. The Hijra is framed in the text as the ultimate sacrifice, leaving behind everything tangible for something entirely intangible.
So they execute the escape, but they don't just ride off on the main road to Medina. They head to the cave of Thar and hide there for 3 agonizing days. Let's look at the mechanics of this scene, because the trackers from Mecca aren't amateurs.
Not at all. They are expert desert navigators.
Right. They can read a footprint in the sand like a map, and they follow the trail right up to the very mouth of the cave. Inside, Abu Bakr is deeply anxious, whispering that if the pursuers simply glance down at their feet, they will be discovered.
You really feel that intense claustrophobic suspense, right? The
Yeah.
enemy standing mere inches away. But the tradition highlights a profound contrast in that exact moment.
Facing ultimate physical peril.
Yeah, the Prophet exhibits complete tranquility. He turns to Abu Bakr and asks, "What do you think about 2 men, if Allah is their third?" He's shifting the focus entirely.
Away from the immediate, terrifying reality of the swords outside.
Exactly, to the metaphysical reality of divine presence.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the mechanism that turns those expert trackers away isn't like a miraculous storm or a sudden rock slide.
No, not at all.
According to the text, it is a simple spiderweb spun across the entrance of the cave.
It is a beautiful thematic contrast that scholars have pointed out for centuries. You have this hunting party, right? Powerful men, armed to the teeth, driven by rage.
And political desperation.
Yes, and they are completely thwarted by what the Quran later describes metaphorically as the most fragile of houses, a spiderweb.
Because the logic of the trackers is entirely physical. They see an intact web and deduce that no one could have recently entered. But they could have broken it with a single finger.
Precisely. But the text uses this to prove a larger theological point. Brute force and sharp swords are ultimately powerless when the divine ordains that the weakest, most delicate creation in nature will serve as an impenetrable shield.
It completely upends the human understanding of power and vulnerability. Iron stopped by silk, basically.
That's a great way to put it. Iron stopped by silk.
But eventually, they do have to leave that sanctuary and face the open desert. They take this grueling coastline route, moving south to eventually go north.
Specifically to avoid the main caravan roads.
Right. Meanwhile, the Quraysh escalate the situation by placing an enormous bounty on their heads. 100 camels, dead or alive.
And just to contextualize that economically, 100 camels in that society represents immense generational wealth.
It's the equivalent of a multi-million-dollar reward today. Every mercenary and tracker in the region is suddenly hunting them. Which brings us to the pursuit by Suraka.
Yeah, Suraka is a skilled hunter, heavily motivated by the sheer economic windfall of this bounty. The accounts describe him spotting them in the vast emptiness of the desert.
Charging forward on his horse.
He is closing the distance, literally moments away from securing unimaginable wealth.
But the pursuit abruptly fails. The text describes Suraka's horse suddenly sinking up to its knees into the solid desert sand, throwing him violently to the ground.
And we really have to emphasize, as the accounts do, that this was not quicksand. It wasn't a soft dune. This was hard, packed earth. Suraka is a man of the desert.
He knows the terrain.
Exactly. For his horse to sink into solid ground defies all physical logic. He's deeply superstitious, so he casts arrows of divination to decide whether to continue.
And the arrows say stop.
They do, but the psychological pull of those 100 camels is just too strong. He remounts and charges again, and again the earth swallows the horse's legs.
The narrative says it happens a third time, and this time a cloud of dust explodes in his face. And that's the psychological breaking point.
It is. In that moment of repeated, unnatural failure, Suraka realizes he isn't fighting two exhausted travelers. He is fighting a divine mandate.
The dynamic completely flips.
Yeah, the lethal predator is humbled and suddenly becomes a beggar, pleading for peace.
And the prophet not only grants him peace, but actually has a document of protection written up for him right there in the desert.
A document that the histories note would end up saving Suraka's life years later.
It's just a fascinating look at how the journey was marked by these intense, transformative encounters.
But there are also these incredibly quiet, majestic moments, like their stop at the tent of an old Bedouin woman named Mabad.
Right. Mabad's tent was a known resting place for travelers, but the region was suffering a severe drought at the time. When they arrived, she had literally no food to offer.
The texts mention she had only one emaciated, incredibly weak goat sitting in the corner. A creature so frail it couldn't even walk out to pasture with the rest of the flock.
Yet, the prophet asks for permission to milk it. She points out the physical impossibility. The goat is completely dry. But according to the tradition, when he touches the goat, it miraculously produces an abundant flow of milk.
And he ensures Mabad is served first, then his companions, and he drinks last.
Which physically embodies the leadership principle he taught, right?
Hey.
That the leader of a people is their servant.
Beautifully said. But what has truly cemented this encounter in the historical record is what happens after they depart. When Mabad's husband returns and sees this impossible abundance of milk, he is shocked.
He asks who visited them.
And the description Mabad provides in response is widely considered by historians to be one of the most breathtaking, poetic, and comprehensive portraits of the prophet ever recorded.
She doesn't just describe his physical features, she captures his presence. She describes his ideas flowing like pearls moving on their string.
No.
Yeah, she notes that he commanded an intense, natural respect when he was silent, and displayed a radiant, commanding intelligence when he spoke, a magnetism that completely captivated his companions.
It's an incredible piece of historical poetry.
But, I want to pause and look at the timeline here because something seems slightly contradictory. He performs this highly visible act at Muhammad's tent, leaving this lasting impression. He reveals his identity to Suraka, even writing him a document.
Okay, I see where you're going.
But earlier on the road, the texts note that if a stranger asked Abu Bakr who his traveling companion was, Abu Bakr would use a verbal disguise. He would just say, "This is my guide. He is showing me the path."
Right, right.
Why utilize spycraft and disguise with some people, but allow this radiant, majestic visibility with others?
That is a crucial observation about how the migration was actually conducted. What you're seeing is the careful navigation between human prudence and the public nature of a divine mission.
So the disguise was necessary.
Yes, when Abu Bakr called him a guide, he was utilizing a linguistic concept known as Toraya. It means speaking a statement that is technically true, but allows the listener to interpret it differently.
So to a passing bounty hunter, it just meant a literal desert guide hired for navigation.
Exactly. But internally to Abu Bakr, it meant a spiritual guide to the divine. They absolutely had to protect his identity to survive.
But with Suraka and Muhammad, when they encountered individuals whose hearts were open, like Suraka after his humbling realization, or the inherently generous Mabad, the text suggests the light of his mission just couldn't be concealed.
That concept of human prudence brings up a massive paradox in the narrative. We're discussing these profound moments of divine protection, the spider web, the solid ground swallowing the horse, the miraculous milk.
Right.
If the prophet knew with absolute certainty that he was divinely protected, why go through the incredibly intricate 10-step logistical plan to escape Mecca in the first place? If we connect this to the bigger picture, this represents perhaps the most vital philosophical lesson of the Hijra. In this tradition, faith is never presented as an excuse for inaction.
The prophet was laying down a blueprint for how human beings are supposed to operate in the world.
Exactly. Because the plan was meticulously earthly. They left at noon when the streets were clear. He had his cousin Ali sleep in his bed as a decoy to fool the assassins.
They hired a non-Muslim guide simply because he was the best expert on the hidden desert routes.
They used flocks of sheep to walk over their footprints and erase their tracks. They even headed south toward Yemen initially, the complete opposite direction of Medina, just to throw the hunting parties off.
He utilized every ounce of human intellect, strategic misdirection, and logistical caution available to him.
The theological message is that trusting the divine means first doing absolutely everything within your human capacity. It's the principle of, tie your camel and then trust in God.
He didn't sit in his house waiting to be miraculously transported to Medina.
No, he exhausted human effort first.
And when we talk about human effort, we have to talk about the physical and psychological weight carried by the unsung heroes of this plan, particularly the women. The courage demonstrated behind the scenes, it's just remarkable.
It really is. Look at Asma, Abu Bakr's daughter.
Her role was critical. She had to secretly supply them with food while they hid in the cave of Thar.
The sources tell us that to carry the heavy provisions, she actually tore her own girdle in half to tie the bags, an act of quick thinking that earned her the historical title, She of the Two Belts.
But Asma's contribution wasn't just logistical. It required immense psychological resilience.
Yeah, the texts detail how, after the Prophet and Abu Bakr slipped away, Abu Jahl, the very architect of the assassination plot, came furiously pounding on her door.
He demanded to know the whereabouts of her father.
And Asma stood her ground and completely refused to give him any information. In a fit of rage, Abu Jahl slapped her across the face with such force that her earring was torn off.
Wow.
Yet she didn't break. She absorbed the physical violence and kept the secret.
And then she had to manage the internal crisis of her family too. Abu Bakr's father, Asma's grandfather, was blind. When he realized Abu Bakr was gone, he was terrified that his son had abandoned the family and taken all their money to fund the journey.
Right, he was panicking.
Asma realizes she has to calm his anxiety. So she gathers heavy rocks, places them in the sack where the family used to keep their wealth, and guides her blind grandfather's hands over it.
She tells him, look, he left us plenty.
She's actively absorbing the violence of their enemies and the emotional panic of her family, managing both with steadfast grace.
It clearly demonstrates that the Hijra was never just a story of two men in a cave. It was a massive collective effort by an entire community of believers, men, women, and youth, who were willing to sacrifice their safety to ensure this message survived.
Which finally brings us to the arrival, the entrance into Medina. The accounts describe a city that had been waiting in agonizing suspense.
Every single day, people would go out to the edge of the city and stare into the burning horizon. They'd wait until the midday heat literally forced them to seek shelter.
And then finally, a lookout spots them. The Prophet and Abu Bakr arrive, wearing brand new white garments they had been gifted along the way.
The emotional release in Medina is described as an eruption of pure joy. It was a monumental celebration.
The men of the city rushed out fully armed, but not for battle.
No, they formed a ceremonial honor guard to demonstrate their absolute respect and their readiness to defend him. The Abyssinians engaged in joyous, martial dances with their spears in the streets.
And the imagery of the children is so vivid. The young girls of the city climbed onto the rooftops, singing out to him, "We are girls of the Ansar. How wonderful if Muhammad were our neighbor."
And the Prophet responds to them with deep affection, telling them that his heart loves them.
The term Ansar means the helpers, right? And the texts are filled with examples of their legendary generosity. Everyone in Medina wanted the prestige of hosting the Prophet in their home.
He eventually stays at the house of a man named Abu Ayyub, and the story of this stay perfectly encapsulates that generosity.
It's a two-story house.
Right. The Prophet insists on taking the lower level simply because he knows people will be coming to visit him constantly, and he doesn't want them to have to intrude through the family's living space upstairs.
But Abu Ayyub is distressed by this. He feels it's deeply disrespectful for him to be physically walking above the Prophet.
And then one night, a water vessel breaks on the upper floor. Abu Ayyub and his wife are seized by panic. They are terrified that the dirty water might seep through the floorboards and drip onto the Prophet below.
Their reaction to this accident is incredibly telling.
They don't have towels or mops. They take their blanket, which the text specifies as the only blanket they own, and they frantically use it to soak up all the spilled water.
They willingly choose to sleep in the freezing cold, shivering under damp clothes, rather than risk a single drop of water falling on their guest.
It's just staggering.
So what does this all mean? We look at this beautiful welcome, the songs from the rooftops, the profound sacrifices. It paints a picture of a perfect, peaceful utopia, right? Like he finally reached the finish line.
It is very tempting to view the arrival in Medina as a fairy tale ending to a dark chapter. But the historical reality outlined in the sources is far more complex.
Medina was not a unified, peaceful haven.
Not at all. When the Prophet stepped into that city, he walked into a highly fractured, volatile, socio-political powder keg.
Because Medina wasn't functioning as a single city-state. The texts describe it more like a collection of heavily fortified neighborhoods, deeply divided by blood and money.
You had two major Arab tribes, the Aus and the Khazraj, who had literally spent generations locked in an exhausting, bloody civil war.
And layered on top of that tribal warfare was intense economic friction.
Medina's economy was heavily agricultural, relying on date palms. Agriculture inherently requires capital between harvests, which meant the farmers constantly needed loans.
And the three distinct Jewish tribes in Medina largely controlled this capital, providing loans with heavy interest rates.
Which created a deeply entrenched system of debt, leading to bitter economic resentment between the different factions.
And into this mix of blood feuds and debt, you have dangerous personal ambitions. There's a man named Abdullah ibn Ubay who, right before the Hijra, had managed to broker a fragile peace and was literally preparing to be crowned the king of Medina.
The crown was actually being fashioned for him.
But the moment the Prophet arrived, the political center of gravity shifted entirely.
Abdullah ibn Ubay's kingship evaporated overnight, and he harbored a bitter, politically dangerous jealousy from that moment on.
This is why the Hijra is the ultimate turning point. The Prophet didn't just arrive to act as a spiritual guide leading prayers. He had to instantly become an unparalleled statesman.
He had to navigate between deeply entrenched ethnic divisions, complex economic grievances, and furious political rivals.
Migration wasn't the end of his struggle.
No, it was the mechanism that forced him to weave all these warring, disparate threads into a single, functional society.
It's a remarkable historical narrative. As we synthesize all of this, from the genius of the distributed assassination plot, to the psychological fortitude of asthma, to the fragile spiderweb holding back brute force.
It's impossible not to feel the profound awe embedded in these texts.
Absolutely. It is a sweeping historical epic. Yet the scholars remind us that it is also meant to be deeply personal.
It is, because beyond the literal geographical migration detailed in the history, the texts emphasize the concept of a figurative hijra.
A continuous daily action for every individual.
Exactly. It's the personal migration away from negativity, from harmful environments, from impurity and destructive habits, and moving purposefully toward light, justice, and goodness.
We've seen how the historical accounts describe a spiderweb as stronger than a sword, and how a brutal desert can yield a miraculous cup of milk. We've seen the meticulous human effort required to build a new society. So if the texts tell us that leaving everything behind was necessary to fulfill this profound legacy, what Mecca might you need to leave behind in your own life to build something beautiful in your own Medina?